Well, they were put into conservatorship under the Housing and Economic Recovery Act, and it was never intended to be a permanent situation. If they had rehabilitated themselves, if they did, the housing market rebounded. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac rebounded along with it. And so the issue right now is, can the government operate the mortgage market better than the private sector? And I think, the answer to that is obviously no. Otherwise, JP Morgan, Bank of America, all the other banks that took TARP money, they're doing just fine. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are different companies than they were in 2008.
But don't we need Fannie and Freddie, don't we, to keep the liquidity of the housing market moving forward? So the role they play is still necessary. That's correct, or am I wrong?
No, absolutely. This goes back to Henry Morgenthau and FDR, when the banks were in terrible, straits, and we didn't have a 30-year mortgage back then. The average mortgage was 5 to 7 years. And so when you don't have a job and housing prices are dropping and the Federal Reserve and the banking system is on you to raise capital and tighten up your balance sheets, people were getting thrown out of their homes. And so they had to do something to counteract the pro-cyclical nature of our financial system. And so they created the 30-year mortgage in what eventually became Fannie Mae and then Freddie Mac. And that has really been the bedrock of how we have been able to make housing part of the American dream.
But the original concept for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is there are shares. Investors can buy shares in these entities, but there was the unannounced, and forgive me because I have forgotten 2008 except for the big headlines. There's the government guarantee that if something goes wrong, Uncle Sam is there to back it up. Is that accurate?
No, not really. There was a government guarantee, and policymakers in the 60s started looking at the tremendous impact that all of these housing loans were having on the federal balance sheet. Imagine that back then. And so they took Fannie Mae public in this public-private partnership with an implicit guarantee and government backing, so that they could get those loans off the books. And so the $7.2 trillion that is backed through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, that's not on the federal balance sheet. And certainly at this point in time, we don't need them on the balance sheet. And it's unnecessary. They've done a tremendous job. They've built 750 credit scores. They've got loan to value of 65%. Unfortunately, we have a shortage of housing today, especially for first-time home buyers. The situation is fundamentally different. And they have capital, and they have capital reserve requirements that they didn't have back then. Even Jamie Dimon today made a great comment. He said, Lehman Brothers wouldn't fail today because of the new capital rules and the way our banking system has been completely changed. And Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are part of that as well.
So when we hear the Trump administration talk about the potential to take Fannie and Freddie out of conservatorship and go public, what does that mean? How does that happen? What would it look like? And if I'm an investor thinking, this might be because people will always want to buy a house, how do I get in on it?
Well, administratively, under the authority granted by HERA and following the Collins decision, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, through the Federal Housing Finance Administration, is overseen by the president, the executive branch of government at this point. And so the government, as part of the unbelievable deal they cut in 2008, they own 79.6% of the outstanding shares of Fannie Mae if they exercised the warrants that went along with the package that they got for advancing money for losses. Now, during the Obama administration, they had a net worth sweep where they took 100% of their earnings and profits. And in 2019, September of 2019, Mark Calabria, under President Trump's direction, ended that net worth sweep and allowed them to start accumulating capital. And so they've been accumulating capital ever since. They've accumulated over $160 billion in capital at this point. And the value of the shares is estimated now in excess of $250 billion. So the government stands to benefit tremendously at a time where there aren't a lot of funds for housing, there aren't a lot of funds for discretionary spending. That money can be put better to use in anything other than staying stagnant inside Fannie and Freddie.
And if Fannie and Freddie were private, you mentioned the capital requirements. Who would enforce? Would it be the Fed, or would it be a different entity within the government to enforce the capital requirements to make sure that the loans that Freddie and Fannie are buying, that there doesn't become a buildup of loss that would then require another government step in?
Currently, they would be overseen by the Federal Housing Finance Administration and the United States Treasury with input from the Federal Reserve. So it's a combination of things that would establish what those capital requirements are, though. Interestingly, they have been through a number of stress tests over the last few years. And in adverse stress tests, just like they put the banks through, Fannie and Freddie operate very efficiently with 2.5% capital, which is much lower than what they're targeted for now, and they still make money. It's an amazing creation. It's the most profitable financial services firm in the world. One thing I'd point out too, that the American taxpayer benefits so much from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They pay over $600,000 per employee in federal corporate income tax. That's the highest of any company in America. That's almost 5 times as much as Apple. JP Morgan, by comparison, pays $43,000 per employee. So these are great American companies that contribute in so many ways to our economy.
But before we started the program, you and I were having a conversation, and I brought up what's happening in the housing market now. It's shifting to a buyer's market, except in hot places like Miami. And parts of Florida, though, are in trouble because of the condo situation. That's another episode. In fact, we're talking about that next week with a real estate agent from Key West. But in your neck of the woods, Nashville, it's become a buyer's market. And Nashville is one of those hot cities where we're seeing companies from California move to Nashville. We're seeing companies from the East Coast go to Nashville. And yet, if it's a buyer's market, would that pose a threat to Fannie and Freddie if prices come down? Would that jeopardize their portfolios in any way?
Their portfolios are so strong right now with their loan to value and the credit scores and the average interest rate in their portfolios under 4%. And I think it's important to differentiate problems in the housing market. In Nashville, it's the higher end homes. It's the $1.5 million home and up that's dropping as much as 10 to 20%. So Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they serve first-time home buyers typically.
Right.
So that market, there's still a tremendous shortage. There's still tremendous demand. And until we increase the supply of housing for first-time home buyers, it's about as secure as you can get in the financial services industry, because no one wants to lose their home now, because if they do, they're losing a great interest rate. And at the same time, where are they going to go? So there's a lot of incentive right now that didn't exist in 2008 when we had this tremendous oversupply of housing everywhere. Well, higher interest rates definitely would maintain a much slower uptake in the housing market and the end of this shortage. So it doesn't help anyone. And, I think that the compromise that we're trying to find here, and I served on the committee for a responsible federal budget. Sounds like an oxymoron, till 2019, when the federal budget was under $20 trillion, and I was upset about it. But the compromise here is we didn't get ourselves in this position overnight. Tariffs will be a source of revenue. Economic activity will be a source of revenue. The threat of stagflation, which is what you're talking about, has to be dealt with. I was in a small group meeting with Treasury Secretary Bessent that Senator Haggerty sponsored at the end of March. And they have a plan. They have a plan to increase demand for U.S. Treasuries, increase the supply. And I'm very confident in their ability, especially Treasury Secretary Bessent's ability to guide us through this problem.
What if the administration's getting it right? We were fed a diet from people opposed to what's happening of doom and gloom. It's going to raise inflation. It's going to destroy the economy. And even, I was about to say Bernanke again, even Jay Powell today said, we're not sure yet of the impact on the tariffs. But we haven't seen the dire impact as of yet. And we are now 6 months into the administration. Would you be willing, you just said Bessent and the team have a plan. What do you say to the naysayers about the administration's plans? Because those same naysayers, I'm sure, will oppose efforts to take Fannie and Freddie out of conservatorship.
Well, everybody has an opinion. The naysayers, for whatever reason, the Jim Parrott crowd, for example, and the Zandy crowd that are against taking Fannie and Freddie out of conservatorship, it's only because they wasted the opportunity in the Biden administration to do it. And they've lost control over that narrative. And so you just have to believe that they're going to make the right decision for the American people, for the American taxpayer specifically, in guiding us through this. And I think that the tremendous amount of gain that Fannie and Freddie can provide to the U.S. Treasury and the benefits that they continue to bring in. I mean, we need a lot more companies paying $600,000 per employee to the U.S. Treasury. So, let's let them run under appropriate capital standards and good management and see what we can do to restore the American dream of home ownership.
That $600,000 figure, I would love to explore that, because I'm sitting there thinking, wait a second, where's the data coming from for that? Real quick, if someone wanted to verify that number, where should they go?
Bureau of Labor Statistics, it's there. Walmart, 2.1 million employees, $1,500 in corporate income tax.
Okay. All right.
You can break it down.
I see. I get it.
By year. Yeah. So we've got it. President Trump, has made very positive statements about exiting conservatorship. And, for the naysayers, probably the best thing they could do to help this along is tell President Trump that he can't do something that has to wait to the next administration.
I hope that the policies we've been talking about do bring about the kind of transition in our economy that benefits a great many people as opposed to the upper income, because that's what I think is behind the momentum here in New York City for an individual who could very well wreck the local economy. But it's hard to get people to see, when we talk for this conversation, that there is a benefit to all and not just the asset holding class if we were to bring Fannie and Freddie out of conservatorship. What would you say, again, I'm going to use the term naysayer, what would you say to them? And then I'll let you have the last word.
I'd love to tell Elizabeth Warren that back off. The federal government and the American taxpayer own 80 to 90% of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. So yes, are there shareholders that are going to benefit? Absolutely. But, look at what Winston Churchill said. You can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. And we are at that point where this is the right thing. It benefits everyone. And there's no sense in prolonging it. I hope the president will act.